All right. Hope you're having a great day. It is beautiful outside. We are getting a little bit later start, hence the Outlaw energy drink. Don't worry, it's not a White Claw. But I'm excited because today we're going to talk about how Jesus addressed racism. Now, unless you're hiding under a rock, which, if you're watching this video, I'm assuming that you're not, you should be very aware of some of the conversations that are taking place in our culture right now. In fact, I'm down here at Heritage Park where just a little bit ago, not today, but just a little while ago, there was protests in this very park for the senseless killing of George Floyd, and honestly, a lot of the other things that are taking place across our country right now. Now, I'm going to be real with you. The danger in doing this video is that people are going to try to make it political. What I'm about to say or what I'm about to unpack political. And I want you to understand that that was never my intent. That was never my intent in making this video. My intent with this video was not to be political, right? People want you to choose this side or that side. And I had this thought as I was walking into the office, man, I want to choose Jesus' side. What does the Bible have to say about this topic and how I as a Christian should handle it? Mosquito. To me, that is one of the most important things to remember here, is that as believers or as Christ followers or professing Christians, our source of truth is not media. It is not what people share on Facebook. It is not little shorts, video clips that we see. It is what the Bible has to say to us. And I'll be honest with you, the Bible has a lot of different places that it covers this issue. And today we're going to talk about one of them in particular, and then we will reference another one as well. All right, I hope you took time to read those passages, because as we get into unpacking them, it might be a little bit easier to understand those passages and what I'm going to be saying in the context of the scriptures. But before I get into unpacking those things, I'd like to just comment as to why I decided to do this video. Right, earlier I said it's easy to make things political, but I just want to know what Jesus says, and that really is my heart on this issue. Is that when we face the problems, the ugliness, the brokenness of the world, that it would drive us to examine what the Bible has to say about it, and then even examine our own lives as we move forward from it. And so that's what I think we're doing today. We're talking about these two passages where where it is very clear that Jesus and Paul are addressing racial division or prejudices that have been developed for one reason or another. So in the first passage, this one's very common, very well known. A lawyer gets up and asks Jesus, what are the greatest commandments? Jesus, like a boss, turns that question back around and says, listen, what does the law of Moses say? And he answers, love God, love people. You have answered this correctly. But where we start to see this man's motivations, where we start to see Jesus press into what's going on inside of this man's heart, and not just his heart, but even his Jewish brothers and sisters around him, is in verse 29. It says, this man, in order to justify his actions, asked this next question, which was, who is my neighbor? And Jesus goes on to tell a story where he uses a man who's traveling, who gets beaten, and he gets robbed, and he gets left for dead, and 3 people walk by this man. The first 2 are a Jewish priest or a temple priest, and then the other one is a temple assistant. Both of them walk by, they see this man left for dead, and they do nothing. The third one comes by, and he doesn't just do something about it, but he goes above and beyond, so much so that he puts him on a donkey, bandages him up, puts him on a donkey, takes him into town, and even rents him in a hotel for overnight, or a room, however you want to say it. This man was a Samaritan. And to understand why this illustration is so powerful, we have to understand how much a Jewish person would have hated a Samaritan. This hate stems all the way back to basically 700s BC, when the northern kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom of the Jewish nation, was captured by Assyria. And some of them were put into slavery, and some of them were put or decided to intermarry with the Assyrians, creating a race or ethnic group called the Samaritans. And so Jewish people viewed these people with hatred and disgust, so much so that they would call them half-breeds. There were wars, there were desecration of temples, there was, you name it, it happened as a result of it. They hated each other. And so Jesus, instead of ignoring those feelings, instead of ignoring those prejudices, he presses into it and says, listen, you think that you're loving your neighbor, you think that you love God, you think you're obeying these commands, but what about this situation? And so he asks him, who was the one who was his neighbor? And the man couldn't even acknowledge that it was a Samaritan. He said, the one who showed him mercy. We see that kind of towards the end of that story. So the first point that I kind of want to bring up, or the first thing I think we can do when we are faced with these troubles in the world, is face them head on. Not just search the scriptures, but examine our own hearts and where do we struggle with this? Where do we line up with it? Because a lot of times I think we see these things and our immediate reaction is to suppress it, or our immediate reaction is to put it off or push it off and either not think about it or act like we have a full understanding of it. But press in, because we might expose something in our own life that might need to be changed. And that brings us to the second point that I want to make. And we find this in Galatians, when Peter comes to this region, and at first he's dining with everybody. He has no issues with anybody. He's treating everybody equally. But then all of a sudden he starts receiving criticism and stops eating with basically non-ethnic Jews. The way that it describes them is uncircumcised versus circumcised. And so he starts eating with Jewish believers. And Paul sees this, and in verse 14 he says, when I saw that Peter was not in line with the truth of the gospel, he called him out on it. He said, you are not under that law anymore, right? You are under Christ. And so the second thing that I think we need to do is we need to make a conscious decision to be better. We need to make a conscious decision to turn from whatever it is we're facing in the world, and right now that is prejudice and racism. And if we have any of those inklings in our heart, we have to make a conscious decision to repent and to turn from those things. And this brings me to my last point. In verse 14, Paul makes it very clear that Peter was not in line with the truth of the gospel. Well, what is the gospel? The gospel is that for God so loved the world, right, that he loved everybody, that he gave his one and only son, right? So when we alienate certain people or we elevate certain people, we go outside of what the gospel is, because we have all fallen short of the glory of God. We are all broken in need of his grace and mercy. And so when we come to this realization that maybe we have some things in our own hearts that we need to deal with, particularly right now, we're talking about the areas of prejudice or racism. We understand that, and then we begin to make that conscious decision change, but that is not motivated by shame or guilt, right? It is for freedom that Christ has set us free, that we are no longer bound by sin and shame and guilt. Sure, we might have conviction about it. Sure, we might experience some level of shame and guilt, but when we come to change, this is my third point, when we come to change, it is motivated out of a love for God and a love for people. That when we see the wickedness in our lives, we deal with the guilt and shame, we begin to make a conscious decision to change because we realized how we might be dishonoring our God, and we might realize how we have dishonored our neighbor. That is our motivation, love for God and love for people. I know these things are difficult, and I know our heads want to go every different way, but I hope this enlightened you on how maybe the scriptures have talked about this issue in particular and what we might be able to do with it as a result. Love you guys. Grace and peace.